Okay, so this video is going to be a review of Bleeding Kansas and the Dred Scott decision. Before we start, I want to go over the question I asked you about Uncle Tom's Cabin when we did the Newsella article. Okay, I asked you guys at the end, was Uncle Tom's Cabin strong enough in the fight against slavery? Okay, and I got some really good responses from these students, so I just want to highlight these responses. All right, as we see here, this is because it was a huge influence in the anti-slavery debate and many people discussed it. That is very true. Okay, guys, Uncle Tom's Cabin is going to bring attention to this anti-slavery debate. Okay, Lincoln himself is going to say this book is what's going to start the war. All right, and this book is going to increase the number of abolitionists, and that plays a part in the war. Another thing we see here is it's great at getting the nation talking about slavery. Before this was something that the nation did not really discuss. They kind of ignored it. They did not want to discuss it. They only discussed it when they absolutely had to. Okay, and it brings attention to it to people who were ignoring it. Okay, it starts this long overdue discussion. And we see here the book quickly becomes famous. It convinces people to fight against slavery. And it also comes right after the Fugitive Slave Act. And sounds like the book changed people's thoughts and decided to keep helping slaves and not turn them in. Okay. And without this book, no one would know how life in slavery is like. That is very true. Without this book, some people in the North would have no idea what slavery, what they experienced. In a way, I want you guys to think of Tiger King. Okay. I don't know about you guys, but I had no idea you can actually own a tiger in America and how it really isn't that expensive. All right. Tiger King brought my attention to that. In a way, this is what Uncle Tom's Cabin is doing about slavery. It's bringing attention to slavery to people who don't really know about it. All right, and now some of you guys were getting confused with the Fugitive Slave Act. Some of you guys are saying the problem with the Fugitive Slave Act was slaves were escaping to Canada. No, the problem with this Fugitive Slave Act was that the North was ignoring this law. Okay, it's kind of like social distancing. Some people are ignoring it. Okay, the problem we have with the Fugitive Slave Act was people in the North ignored this law. They didn't help the slave catchers. Okay, these people were violating government orders because they were ignoring it. It doesn't really have to do with slaves escaping to Canada. The big problem is people were ignoring this law, especially in the North. All right, let's focus on Bleeding Kansas. All right, in Kansas, the struggle over slavery is going to turn violent. Okay, we have pro-slavery settlers from Missouri invading the home of the anti-slavery government. They're going to burn, destroy some stores and homes. It's kind of like they're rioting. All right. And they're going to take printing press and throw them into the river. And this is what a printing press looks like. This is how newspapers were made during this time period. So this is how they would share their ideas and their arguments on why slavery has to end. And by throwing it into a river, they're not able to make their newspapers. And this is not easy to be replaced. All right. In response to that, John Brown, an abolitionist, he's going to plan revenge. Pay attention to John Brown because he's going to show up again at the end of this unit. But Brown pretty much gets some people to follow him to a pro-slavery town. And they're going to pretty much do the same thing that happened earlier to the anti-slavery settlers. Just what Brown also does is this group is going to drag 5 men who support slavery from their homes and actually hack them to death with swords. And I use the word hack here because I want you guys to understand that's like when you take a weapon and you just repeatedly hit something with it. All right, so that's what they're doing here. All right, but with a sword, not an axe. All right, these attacks between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers become known as Bleeding Kansas. These attacks are going to shock the nations, and this is going to encourage more settlers to move to Kansas to join the fighting. So I want you guys to visualize that people are actually fighting over the issue of slavery, and more people want to go to Kansas to join. All right, and this is a very famous painting from the time period. This is John Brown here. I'm sorry that the image is a little blurry, but if you just glance at it, you see a tornado in the back. Okay, that's kind of sending you the message that it's just chaotic over there. It's dangerous. And if you look where he's standing, he's in the middle. And if you look to the left, you have some people with a rifle, the American flag. You look to the right, you see a Confederate flag over here. You see other people with a rifle. All right, this is going to look very similar to future paintings on the war where you have one side of the country here, one side of the country over here. All right, so now let's talk about what's going on in Kansas. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts believes Senator Douglas was plotting for Southerners to make Kansas a slave state. Because remember, Douglas wanted to get the railroad built, and he wouldn't be able to do that unless Kansas and Nebraska became a state. So all that this senator is doing is pretty much calling out Stephen Douglas. They're saying, hey, you plotted with the Southerners. This was your plan to just make Kansas a slave state. You're not an honorable person. All right, Sumner is going to make this speech in Congress, okay? And he's going to describe this as crimes against Kansas. All right, he's blaming and he's going to insult Douglas and another Southerner congressman. This man's name is Andrew Butler. The North supports this speech while Southerners, they're shocked, they're not supporting of it, and they think it was out of line. Okay, but pretty much these crimes against Kansas, and he's calling out Senator Stephen Douglas, and they're saying he's responsible for all this. So a couple of days after the speech, Senator Butler's nephew, who's from South Carolina, Preston Brooks, is going to actually attack Sumner in Senate. Okay, Brooks is going to beat him with a metal tip cane until it's going to actually break. By the time they pull Brooks off Sumner, he is knocked out. He's bleeding. And pretty much in the South, Southern states are going to support his actions, and they're going to actually replace his cane. People start mailing him a replacement cane. And in the North, the northern states just see this as, hey, this is just another example of how violent and how brutal the people are in the South. So just to give you guys some images, because there were no Instagram and social media back then, so you can't visualize what actually happened. These are some illustrations of what happened. You see over here how he just attacked him in Senate, right? People just sit there, they vote on laws, they discuss laws, and it actually turns violent. All right, this is another illustration. Okay, kind of see his head has some scratches on it. And over here, this is just showing you he was stuck in a bed for several days after this because he couldn't move. All right, that's how bad he was beat. All right, and this is just a picture of the cane. All right, this resembles the cane that was used. You see at the top, it's metal, and this is going to actually break in half. All right, and in a way, the South is saying, hey, good job by replacing this cane. So Dred Scott, let's focus on Dred Scott. In 1857, okay, this is about, I want to say, 4 years before the war starts, 3 years before the war starts, the slavery debate shifted away from Congress to the Supreme Court. A Missouri slave named Dred Scott traveled with his owner to Wisconsin, where slavery was banned by the Missouri Compromise. When Scott is going to return to Missouri, he's going to go to court and say, hey, I should be free because in Wisconsin, I stayed there and that's what made me a free man. So now the Supreme Court has questions to answer. Okay. Was Dred Scott a citizen who had the right to bring his case to court? Did his time in Wisconsin make him a free man? Okay, because remember, he was a slave, and then he went to Wisconsin, which is a free state, and then he went back to Missouri. So his argument is, by living in Wisconsin, that made him a free man. Did Congress have the power to make a law that concerns slavery in all the territories? Was the Missouri Compromise constitutional? Did it violate fundamental rights? So what the Supreme Court ends up deciding, the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court decision in 1857 that held that African Americans could never be citizens of the United States. Not only do they say African Americans can never be citizens of the United States, it is also going to say that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. And by unconstitutional, that means it's against the law. It's against the fundamental laws of the United States. Okay, they say, according to the courts, slaves are property. Property cannot become citizens. Okay, the next thing they're going to point out, the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says property cannot be taken away from people without due process of law, a proper court hearing. Okay, so by not allowing slaves in certain territories, you are taking away people's property, and you can't do that according to the Constitution. Congress cannot ban someone's property. Congress actually has to protect property. As a result of the Dred Scott decision, slavery is allowed in all territories. A territory cannot say, hey, this is slave-free, no slaves are allowed over here. All right, so just to give you guys another visual, all right, it's going to pretty much rule that Dred Scott is still a slave. It's highlighting the Fifth Amendment. Okay, you guys did those amendment projects last year at Miss Benevento. This is the Fifth Amendment. And the other thing it's going to say is pretty much the Missouri Compromise. Yeah, that's unconstitutional. California doesn't want to have slavery? Yeah, that's unconstitutional. Slaves are allowed to go wherever their masters go. Reaction: slaveholders are going to be delighted with this ruling. Okay, this is what they wanted because this is what they fundamentally believe. These slaves are my property. Why am I not allowed to bring my property where I want to travel to? Okay, and they view this as, hey, the slavery issue has been settled. There's no more room for debate. All right, and abolitionists and many Northerners are going to be stunned. They're not happy with this ruling, and this is just another example of how the nation is dividing. Okay, remember, these Northerners, they all loved Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay, there's plays about it. Okay, the plays are touring the country, but those plays and the novel is not welcomed in the South. It's banned in the South, right? Showing how there's a divide. And I think this map does a good job of showing you how the country is dividing during this time period. Okay, with that being said, sums everything up for Bleeding Kansas and Dred Scott. Please go to Google Classroom, answer the questions.